John, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. So before we started recording, I asked you what was running for Congress like, and you had said that it was something that you had to be in the right place for, and it was a lot like starting a business. For those of us who've never run for Congress and may never run for Congress, what would you say is the most surprising part about running for Congress?
I don't know what's not surprising. It's rewarding. It's just me, with almost being out in the community and learning what's going on, what the issues are, people having me to just meet all kinds of different people. We have 39 cities and towns in the district, and it's really important. I think if you're government, you need to be present in the community and understand what these issues are. So, I'm only a few weeks in here, but I'm already, getting up to speed. I think it's kind of an interesting experience in terms of what it takes to run a campaign of this scale.
Yeah.
It does take a lot of people, but I think it's also the best of democracy. We have a wide open field, and it's going to be. I'm looking forward to the race and getting my message out during the course of the campaign.
So we currently are involved. I would guess, just based on your background, that you're in a precarious position, at least a little bit. Am I correct on that one?
In terms of what?
Well, we have a quote unquote businessman in the White House who has positioned himself as an outsider. And we've kind of seen how that's gone. And speaking from someone who is definitely an outsider, it does not seem to be going well for us. And so there's been in the past. I'm old enough to remember, the Ross Perot's and some of the other candidates that were outsiders that tried to come in and work, try to be different than the system, and it didn't go well for them. And now we have one that's an outsider that came in and is trying to ruin the system. So I guess my question is, how are you going to be combating that differentiation without the possibilities of similarities, given that you are the businessman coming in as the outsider?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a matter of priorities and a matter of what you actually want to accomplish when you get into office. And, we've seen what the Trump administration has been, and what they have done is taken away basic rights and attempted to destroy just democracy and taking things away from the most vulnerable people and cut back on things like healthcare and education, and certainly not solve the economic issues. And so, that's the reason why I'm running. And yes, I do have a legal background, a business background. I've been a lawyer for over, 25 years, and in financial service regulation. I started my own business from scratch, built my business from the ground up, was able to employ several people and get things done from that perspective. But really, the reason why I'm running is I want to give people opportunity and want to, kind of move forward in helping, rebuild our economy. I mean, any metric you look at, affordability is a real concern, especially here in Massachusetts in the sixth district. People can't afford to live. They can't afford housing. They can't afford childcare, basic items such as groceries and whatnot. Education has been cut back. We need to rethink and reform education, provide people opportunities, everything from vocational schools across the board, and different types of ways to build a career and build a business. And then healthcare, on any metric, we've seen the prices of healthcare. We need to protect healthcare. We need to expand the Affordable Care Act. We need Medicare for all. And so really it's priorities. One is difference for me from, and I've been frustrated with what's going on, not only with the Trump administration, but, politicians in general, politicians with broken promises, politicians acting in their own self-interest versus the interests of others. I remember when government was public service, and, that's the way I look at it in terms of if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I'm going to be going in to serve the people and serving the best interests and creating opportunities for others. Now, where the business comes in is that it's a whole different perspective. I'm someone who's had a career in private sector and being able to accomplish things by building coalitions, by working with other people, which you don't see in Congress today. You see real disconnect. You see a polarizing of politics where you have the far left and the far right, and nobody's meeting in the middle. So I think the ability to get things done, and I've done that in business sector. I worked with emerging technologies and created new regulations. I worked on financial services regulation post-financial crisis and implementing consumer protection regulations. I think taking that experience and bringing it into government is a real positive thing, and it gives a whole other dynamic. Because right now, politics and the government in general, and certainly the Trump administration, is not working for everyone.
No, and I think it's important that you note that, I think you're acknowledging one of the issues that I've found with the Trump administration is it isn't just that he's an outsider, it's that he's an outsider and he seems to be intent upon breaking the system, not making the system better. And I think that that's an important distinction that needs to be made from any candidate coming in is that if, the system isn't perfect. And the whole purpose of this podcast is to work on perfecting the union, knowing that that may or may not ever happen, but that we can work towards those goals, that we can come up with the ideas that are going to make a more just, equitable, and certainly beautiful country and society. But burning the house down to accomplish that goal isn't the answer. Is it incremental? I mean, you have a legal background. Precedent is there for a reason. It's to build on and to continue to build ideas that will help move the society forward. It's a slow process. It's a frustrating process, but I think it needs to be for the sake of the benefit of the country, because moving too fast and breaking things has gotten us $1 trillion more in debt than we needed to be. We've had departments like Doge that ended up costing more than what they saved, that basically just break things. And now there's questionable data privacy issues and some other miscellaneous things that are problems. And I guess when you're combining all of those things, you're going, we want the country to be better, not broken. And I think that that's a big difference between what the right versus the left is talking about. Should we be progressing faster, further? Yeah, certainly. I think that we're moving too slow in some areas and not slow enough in others, right? Tell me about, as far as what your goals are for Congress. Like, what is your purpose in running rather than just you're going to be better than someone else?
Yeah, well, you raise a lot of good points. I mean, I agree with you. One, that our democracy is under attack, and we do have a great form of government, right? We have these three branches of government, but right now there's no checks and balances. So it's important and incumbent upon us, especially as Democrats, to take it back. We're seeing the courts being heavily politicized and whatnot, and so there's no checks and balances. And what we're doing is, we're destroying the great ideals that we have, and the great parts of our democracy. And my goal really is to make sure that we protect democracy, make sure that we're providing people opportunity. It starts with those kitchen table issues, which are, what do everybody, whether you're Democrat, Republican, you care about the same things when you wake up in the morning, is make sure that I have a good job, that I can take care of my family, that I can, have a good education. So I'm really focused. Job one is for me is the economy, right? Affordability. We need to bring costs down. We need to work on making sure that people, here in Massachusetts, we have a beautiful community. Our 6th district, we have a coastal communities. We have a lot of great cities and towns in our district, but no, right now you can't afford to live here. And any metric you look at, the cost of living across the board, it's really too high. So we need to figure out, especially housing in particular, we need to increase our housing supply. We need to make sure that we can bring the cost of housing down and other costs in terms of providing credits to people, in terms of providing incentives for people to stay in the state. In fact, when there's young people are leaving the state in record numbers between ages 26 and 35. There's been a lot of discussion. So I think we need to make sure, make a destination again here, especially in Massachusetts, but across the country. We need to be looking at how can we encourage, businesses within our communities of all shapes and sizes, or all the way from small business that are being very difficult for small business owners to get lending programs and access to capital. Is very difficult to get a workforce in those spaces. and larger corporations. We need to encourage in the innovation economy. Something that I care about a lot is leaning into technology in a way that it helps people and creates jobs, and in other ways as well. And the infrastructure surrounding it. I think we see a lot of our infrastructure across the country, especially in Massachusetts, are outdated. Our rail system, our public transit, in other areas, which make it more difficult for the society to be mobile and for our economy and to thrive in general. And so, job one is the economy, and really digging in on that and making it better for everyone, and making people, working families especially, be able to thrive within our state. And then second thing is education. There's alternative forms of education that we need to lean into. We need to expand our curriculum. We need to provide people real world opportunities, everything from financial literacy to vocational programs to other apprenticeship and training programs. We need to also expand the education to take some of the pressure off working families, whether it's universal pre-K, after school programs and whatnot. And then, we have something in Massachusetts, which is tuition-free community colleges, which I think should also be a nationwide program. So I think it's rethinking all these ideas to the end of the day that will help people and provide opportunity. I think what's lacking right now is people don't think the American dream is achievable. We need to make sure that people have, opportunity and hope, and that's what we're going to do. And that's, really what I want to focus in on. And I think I have the background to be able to, have done it in the private sector, and I can bring that to Congress and really make a difference.
And, one of the things that I have to say is that I think the frustrations are Congress could stop what's happening with Trump in a minute. Like we are enduring this absurdity for no good reason. There isn't, like, for instance, his tariffs, that he's taking $12 billion to bail out the farmers because he's screwed that over so bad with the tariffs that now we're spending money that we didn't need to spend on something that didn't need to be worked with. And Congress is the ones that are in charge of the purse strings. It will never, I cannot express how much it blows my mind that Congress would simply abdicate its authority under the Constitution for him, when all they would have to do is push back gently. I mean, they wouldn't even have to do that much work on it, and they choose not to. I mean, and they're literally not following the Constitution for him. And as someone who follows closely to politics, that's really frustrating, because I don't have the power to make those choices. I have to depend on my legislation. We have to depend on the Supreme Court to make these decisions that would push back on his agenda. And yet both Congress and the Supreme Court have basically said, nah, you're cool, dude. We don't mind at all. And you're like, what happened to checks and balances? What happened to the founding fathers meant for us to have 3 co-equal branches of government, not one more, powerful branch than the other? Yet the Supreme Court in their decisions keep on coming out and saying, nah, it's cool. King Trump, basically, without the king, and then they wonder why we call them fascists and dictators and all this other stuff. And you're like, how do you derive any other conclusion than that? Is it a perfect fascistic government? No, we're not there yet. But if we keep letting you do the things that you're doing, it's going to get there, and yet there's more of us than there are of them. There's 77. The fact that more people didn't vote than voted for either candidate in the most recent, in the 2024 election. It absolutely blew my mind that people wouldn't have gotten out to vote for this election, of all the elections not to get out to vote for. And the whole both sidesism drives me up the flipping wall when people start saying, well, both sides do it. I'm like, no, they don't. I'm not saying both sides are perfect, but both sides are not doing it. Both sides are not trying to attack the Constitution. Both sides aren't trying to give, unalive people in boats simply because they're in a boat off the coast of Venezuela, right? Like the absurdity that this is, it just keeps like one day seems to be an entire year these days, and I think we've only been doing it for what 320 days or something crazy like that. 300 days. I don't remember where we're at in the year, but it's just nuts. What steps will you take if you get to Congress that will stop? Like, what will you do to help make it so that we can sit back and say, John was the right choice because he's standing up to Trump. He's standing up to the Republican agenda. He's not letting letting them just run roughshod all over the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, I agree the absurdity is why I'm running against it. And it's also why they're saying, I think they do need outsiders that come in and say what's the system is terrible, right? You look at anything that's happened over the last 8 months or so. You look at what's going on with the court system, what's going on with the justice system, the lawyers. It's really concerning to me in terms of not having no check and balance. And you see now that people in Congress are actually resigning or leaving offices and relation and rep numbers just because of the chaos, right? And so what I bring to this is like, first of all, we need to win the election as a Democrat because that's the one person, that's the check and balance to start. We need to make sure that there's a balance within the Congress. But then once we do that, it's about bringing back, scaling back some of the damage that's been done by the Trump administration little by little, is around these agencies, which is around some of the policies, working with the different states and making sure that we get back to prioritizing things that are important to people. I mean, want to talk about things that were avoidable. This shutdown, which is avoidable, when you have Republicans in charge of Congress. Look at the repercussions like that, and look what happened to people. Food insecurity is a real thing. And the SNAP program, so many people rely on, and to really prey on the most vulnerable people not being addressing is a real shame. And so I think that for me, it's going in there and really focusing on those issues that matter most, and working across Congress and working with other stakeholders is important. I think we are so disconnected. We have to rebuild our sense of community. Certainly within Congress, but as a nation, I think we're so disparate right now. I think we really need to come together, and that's really focusing on common goals, focusing on those things that people care about, and finding common ground. And that's, again, with something I'm focused on. I've been able to do it throughout my career, and I think I would be able to do it as I go into Congress. But it's not going to take one person. It's going to take a village, as they say. And I think at this point, we're starting to see people fight back. We're starting to see, obviously, you see rallies, you see people. You see, in the polling, in terms of the approval numbers and whatnot. But I think they need to get more young people involved. I think the next generation, we need to create our own movement, which is a movement of positivity, a movement of opportunity and hope, and a movement of actually taking back our democracy. And that's what I want to
do. There was another point that I was going to make. We have to understand context that as Congress, as a freshman congressman, I understand that your abilities are significantly different than a senior congressperson. So we have to look at context and go with that too. I guess my next question would be about bodily autonomy. What is your position on women's rights to choose?
Yeah. Well, I should have also mentioned that my most important job as a father to high school students, and one of the main reasons is to protect their future. And I have a daughter, and obviously I believe in women's right to choose. I think there will be ways should be the law of the land, and I think we need to go back to that. We need to make sure that we're protecting reproductive rights, and I think it's as simple as that. Not only this, and many areas, human rights, and have been damaged over the course of the administration. And I think when you get back to making sure that we're protecting rights, and certainly a woman's right to choose is at the top of that list.
Yeah, I'm a father of 6 myself.
Wow.
I have 5
Great.
daughters. Um,
Yeah.
so
Awesome.
yeah, I love my babies. I and when Dobbs came out, my heart broke, because as a father, we are in a unique situation, I believe, that we know men, for lack of a better way of saying it. And the idea that my daughters have less autonomy, especially over something like that, when the idea of any of my daughters being hurt by another man and then forced to deal with those repercussions because another man is telling them what they can and cannot do with their body, just it angers every part of me. And it's interesting because, excuse me, I am not, Republicans are like, oh, you're pro death because you want to have abortions and stuff like that. And I said, no, I'm not pro death. I am pro my daughter and her physician, and if she so chooses, the clergy should be making those choices. That we shouldn't be putting women and making them be incubators. Did you hear about the woman in, I believe it was Georgia, who was brain dead and was forced to carry to term the baby that she was pregnant with before she became brain dead. And so she was basically a human incubator for, I want to say, like 6 months or something crazy. And you're like, the idea that my daughter could be forced in another state, thankfully I live in California where that's not an issue, that they could be forced to carry a baby just absolutely breaks my heart thinking about that. And that they're less free than I am,
Yeah.
just angers me. And it was so done so
It,
flippantly, you know?
yeah. And it's also interesting, we live in something like this is a union, the states are so different. And I've been in Massachusetts, and we've been at the forefront of having human rights for a long time. We were first with gay marriage. We've had, before there was Obamacare, we had mass health care for all. And we've always had very social issues, liberal policies. And I think it's important. I think I'm a big protector of human rights. And I think we need to make sure that we ensure across the board that part of democracy is making sure that people have the ability to have the pursuit of happiness and have the pursuit of free will and making their own way. And that's the very best of democracy. And I think our policies across the board should match that, along with providing people opportunity and to be able to make a good life. And so I think, going into Congress is important to continue to promote that and look at all these things from that viewpoint.
Um, do you have any particular programs that you're thinking of that you would want to implement, that because one of the things that drives me nuts about the pro-life agenda is that they discuss, well, I'm pro-life, but then they don't have any programs or systems in place for women to make a choice that says, I would rather keep the child, or to prop that up without endorsing it, right? Because there's a difference between recognizing choices need to be made, or even if they are, who cares? It's your choice to have a child, whether it's through you want it, or unfortunately if it's thrust upon you and you make that decision. But what programs like SNAP and here in California it's called Medi-Cal, that exist. But what other programs can you think of, or that you've decided that you would want to implement to help promote the family and move it forward, even in those circumstances?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at different areas within healthcare to, not only promote family, to really, again, to help people, especially people in need, right? So one of the biggest areas that I've been focused on is mental health and addiction. So I'm working on something I'm calling the Get Back on Your Feet program. I think with a lot of these issues, we tend to not look at the root cause of things, or we tend to just try to treat things, or we don't know what people to do with folks that are suffering. And I've had this in my own family, and I've had this in, people I know, especially with, mental health and addiction. And I think we need to focus, more holistically in terms of really, it's not only about making sure that people get well, but also can they really live a full life, and making sure you get back on your feet around, job programs and education and support from a family perspective. And so that's just one example, but taking that and replicating it in other areas as well. When you look at education, it's the same type of thing. I mean, making sure that people can get through an education system that's very difficult when people are, can't afford to live, or they're relying on SNAP programs, and the child's going to school hungry, or the child, we can't, the parent is around, or it's difficult because, they can't get after school care or things like that. And so, making sure, and then getting people to make sure that they have the ability to get through school and then get through, whether either it's through a vocational program or go on to higher education, to make sure that you can have a holistic approach to that you build out these programs that not only, again, uh, deal with one small discrete area, or this and that, but you're looking at it in total that really does provide people the opportunities there. And that's, from a government perspective, that's what's really important is, prioritizing. There's only so much, it's when you think about a business or you think about anything. You mentioned Doge, right? I agree. There is a lot of fat in government. You see it, but you can't just deal with it by taking a sledgehammer to it. You got to look at it closely. You got to make sure that you're managing it appropriately in a way, and prioritizing the right things when you're allocating funds, or you're thinking about providing grants, or you're thinking about providing incentives to people to be able to live. You got to look at those areas versus just arbitrarily cutting a Department of Education, or just arbitrarily cutting programs that people rely on a daily basis. And that's, those are the things that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about certain programs that I want to build out, or to potentially, bring forward as a legislation.
Yeah, in fact, who was it? Someone was saying that they are taking the they're taking certain parts of the Department of Education, not certain, they're taking all of it, and putting it into different parts of the government, almost as though they're hiding it, right? Like they're moving it into like the Department of Labor, certain programs. I don't remember the specific ones off the top of my
Mhm,
head, but it was interesting because basically what they were doing is not defunding it, but defunding it all at the same time. Like they were bringing it so that it wasn't front and center. It wasn't prominent. And I thought that's such an interesting thing to do. And I don't mean that in a good way. I mean that as in a why are you being despicable sort of way, just to be clear.
mhm,
Because there's interesting, and then there's like what the Trump administration's been doing. And it's shocking, but what is it? Shocking but not surprising, or surprising but not shocking? Shocking but not surprising. There we go. And the reason why they're doing it is so that they don't have to spend money on these valuable programs and services for people. And
mhm,
I have to wonder, like, what's the long I mean, I understand what the long-term effect will be from that. We will have a less, equitable society. We'll have fewer people that with disabilities that have support systems that they need. It'll be less public, right? Because you can't have, there's only so many resources to be doing. And I wonder why the Department of Education is one of the departments that they've chosen to go after in such a violent way, like they did with USAID, right? They went after these departments, and the idea that we wouldn't want to prevent disease abroad to save a few pennies
mhm,
here blows my mind, because you're like, well, you do realize diseases are, I don't know, transient, like they move from society to society, and like what happened with the pandemic, do we want more of that? And the answer has to be no, but then why are they doing it, right? It doesn't make it doesn't just make it doesn't make fiscal sense, but it also doesn't make moral sense. And I mean, that's, saying they have any morals whatsoever, but which kind of brings me to my next point, or my next
mhm,
question. Um, what is what is your take on crypto? And I ask that
mhm,
because of your financial tech
mhm.
background.
Yeah.
Um, and because right now, you know, we're seeing Trump basically make a mockery out of it. I get the value
Mhm.
behind it. I don't
Mhm.
completely understand it, to be honest, but I do
Mhm.
understand its purpose is to keep, financial things out of government's big hands. But that's
Mhm.
also allowing, which is ironic, more waste, fraud, and abuse by the people that are trying to keep the money out of the government's purview, right? Nobody wants
Mhm.
the IRS spying on them. And I completely
Mhm.
understand that. But then how do we reconcile that with Congress and crypto, right? Like, how do we handle
Mhm.
that?
Yeah. Well, let's put aside, Trump's personal interests of crypto, but just crypto in general, or technology. I mean, I think it's important for us to look at these technologies and study them, sure, and pull the best from them, and make sure that their technology. There's a lot of great things happening, both along the blockchain and along currency, along artificial intelligence. But a lot of these things, and where I spent a lot of my time over the last 12 to 13 years, is making sure that we have proper regulations around it, making sure that we don't stifle innovation, but we innovate in a responsible fashion and make sure that we can use this, utilize these things in ways that actually help people, that create jobs. And there's many ways that, cryptocurrency, there's things like stable coins and other ways that improve our payment system, that provide access to capital, access to the banking system for the unbanked and underbanked. And so those are the areas that we should be supporting, and those are the areas that we need to look at. But it's also important to be educated on these areas. If you're in Congress or you're coming up with legislation, you're coming up with regulations, you really need to understand the benefits and the risks of all these things and how we address both of those areas. But I do think there's an opportunity here for what I call the innovation economy if we do things the right way. And I think we need to make sure that we lean into that. If technology is here, I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think we need to make sure that we're addressing it and doing it responsibly, but also making sure that there are a lot of good things. And AI, of course, there's probably a lot we don't know about it. There know a lot of people use it in their day to day lives now. I mean, I have a business, and I know most of my folks in my business utilize some form of AI to help them enhance or their delivery of their work. And so, that's the way I see it, more as an enhancement tool than a replacement tool. But I think we need to make sure we understand it and that we're doing it in a responsible fashion with some level of regulation.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. Several years ago, gosh, it's been 7 or 8. Right after I graduated law school, took the bar, passed the bar, but it was in that in between when I took the bar and when I found out I passed the bar. I was working for a company doing doc review, which for people that aren't attorneys know, doc review is just basically sitting in a room going through documents all day, and one of the least fun jobs you can have in law at all. I mean, even motion practice is slightly more fun than doing doc review. But one of my friends, because my background, so to give you a little bit of context, my JD is focused on business and securities law, and then also I have an MBA in financial management. So I was more in the crypto world, if you will, than the average person. And even I mean, I understand how it works, but I don't. My friend asked me, he's like, would you invest in this? And I was like, and this was, 7, 8 years ago. So this wasn't, just yesterday. And I was like, there's just so many unregulated portions of it. It's the wild, wild west of things. I don't know that I would. I think it's important that if you're really looking for a solid investment, work with what's currently existing. If you have spare money that you don't really care about, then sure. If you lose it, then you've lost it, but you haven't lost your life. But he's like, well, I wanted to invest, a lot of money, and I was like, but do you have that to lose? And he's like, no. I said, that's your answer right
Yeah.
there. That's your answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't invest what you can't afford to lose in something that's as unregulated as securities or as unregulated as crypto was.
Yeah. Well, we've come a long way. We do have some level of regulation. So I also teach. I'm an adjunct professor at Boston University School of Law, and I teach courses around financial services regulation. And I think crypto and stablecoin. There's been some recent legislation around stablecoin, but I think that's just it. When you, especially from an investor protection standpoint, consumer protection standpoint, it's like in traditional markets, we have regulations to make sure that the investors are educated, they understand the risks, they understand what's happening, and that they have disclosures and whatnot. And you need the similar types of things in cryptocurrency or any type of investment. So I think that's where we need to get to, because you're right. Otherwise, you're taking on a lot of risk, and we want to make sure that that's all kind of addressed in terms from a regulatory perspective. But we also, we believe in free markets and believe in people being able to, it's okay to make money, but it's also you want to make sure people are, there's not undue risk or investor issues, protection issues, and consumer protection issues where people don't understand what they're getting into and can lose also quickly.
Yeah, I'm sure we could probably have a fairly interesting discussion in securities laws and stuff of that nature. But we won't go there because I'm sure most people would be bored out of their minds from it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I teach adjunct at a community college, business law. So obviously different, but I love teaching. It's probably one of my favorite things to do. I find I get more out of that than I do sometimes practicing law. So. But so I guess one of my other questions would be, are you in favor of passing legislation for? Oh, I want to say this correctly. I don't want to say outlaw. That's not the right word. Regulating members of Congress from trading stocks.
Yeah, I mean, we do have laws, right? We have trading laws right now. But I do think, Congress in particular, you have access to information, you have access to things that the public doesn't. And it's just, I mean, from a big perspective, that we're breaking the law. It just doesn't seem to make sense for people. So I would be supportive of some of those restrictions, sure. I think you should be able to, if you're lucky enough, fortunate enough to be in government, in Congress, like I said, I believe in public service, you're serving people, and you're serving a great democracy. And you should be, if you want to do that, then you should be subject to some of these restrictions, sure.
Yeah. And I think it's important. That builds trust, right? Like it builds that you're not making decisions. You're making decisions based upon what's right for your constituents, not what's right for your pocketbook. And if you want to make decisions that are right for your pocketbook, then go do something that involves that. Don't public service should not be a means to. I'm not saying you can't make money, right? I don't want people to think I think you have to be in poverty to be in public service. That's not what I think at all. But I don't think that should be that you should be able to quadruple your net worth by going to Congress, right? Like I think that should not. I think there needs to be more safeguards in there to prevent members of Congress and other members of other areas. Like I would love to see an ethics for the Supreme Court, like an enforceable ethics policy, not the stuff that they've currently done. It broke my heart. So many ways that the Supreme Court has just degraded that institution where I used to look up to it and thought, to argue in front of the Supreme Court or to be on the Supreme Court would just be the highest of honors. And it just they've taken it and they just kind of smeared it with disgustingness. And I had do you know who Leah Littman is?
Whoa.
Okay, she's a constitutional law professor in Michigan, and she's in a podcast called Strict Scrutiny, and she has Supreme Court as SCOTUS is lawless is the she has a recent book out, and it's just so sad to see this fine institution that most of us went to law school grew up admiring and I wouldn't say idolizing, but yeah, to a point, looking at it, and then to see them making these decisions based on outcome that they wanted rather than based upon the law or based upon what should have been made. And the founding fathers, did an amazing job, but they didn't anticipate this. And my wife looked at this, and she's like, "Why is this allowed to happen?" And I said, "Sweetheart, I love you, but in Congress, in everything the founding fathers did, they thought people would behave honorably. They truly did. They'd never thought that there would be enough people that in all three branches of government that would make these types of decisions." And you really have to shake your head, because you would have thought that there would be enough people that would have honor and integrity and say, "No, we're doing it because the law says to do it the right way," or "We have precedent for a reason. We have, we have these separation of powers for a reason," instead of, "No, that's good."
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. I mean, I think that's, not to be over dramatic, we really have to bring it, right? We need to make sure that our democracy is protected, and that we need checks and balances, and we're not getting any of those sources. The courts are the last bastion of it, and then we have people in office that talk about self-interest, and people that are in office and are willing to vote conviction and voting along party lines, if they're willing to step up and stand up to people. I think that's again goes to the really point when we need new people in office to kind of change the dynamic. My other concern is that the pendulum swings vastly the other way. I mean, I do want the Democrats to regain power and win presidency, but we also need to make sure we don't go overboard the other direction. I think we need to reset. We need to bring back, get us back to focusing on things that people care about, and those sorts of things, rather than just kind of getting involved in all the political theater and all those things. But I think the job one is really, again, taking back our democracy, and moving the country forward.
And I want to echo one of your concerns, but in a different way. My concern is that we will legislatively swing the pendulum the other way as well, and that we will clamp down so hard on certain things that we will frustrate growth in other ways, right? Kind of what happened with after the housing crisis of 2008, 2009, during Obama's administration, where they really went the opposite direction, and I completely understand why. But now that we've seen this tyranny on such a grand scale, how are we going to combat it without losing our souls, right? Like to go the complete opposite direction, and bring it back to center without overcorrecting to go too far and I don't want to say too far to the left. I don't mean that. I mean overcorrecting to the point where now, instead of it being a fair, just society because we've corrected for what Trump's done, now we're on the other side of it, where we're an unfair and unjust society because now it's rule by the masses, where the minorities aren't being protected or looked out for. And I think that that's a very important part, is that we don't overcorrect on anything. We correct enough to fix the issues that we see without taking away the value of the people and the individuals that we're here to serve and help. Because the idea that now we it's like, I may disagree with what you say, but I will fight for the right for you to say it, is very badly paraphrased. But that idea that we need to maintain that again, right? We need to come back to saying that, yeah, you might be a disgusting what, but you can still say it, right? John, do you have any last minute thoughts? I know we've been going for a little bit now. I wanted to see if there were any ideas that you wanted to express to your potential constituents that we haven't touched on so far.
I know we can only touch on areas immigration was a concern to me. I think as a lawyer, following all those laws was important. I just think it goes back to the whole understanding of, we just need to get back to common D and be able to understand. I mean, this was I come from, my grandparents came to this country from Italy. So I'm a family of immigrants. I know a lot of people that this what this great country was built upon. I think it comes down to, making sure, for me in this campaign, or for me, what's going on with this country over the next year or so into this election. Again, it comes back to making sure that we protect our democracy and we create opportunity and hope for people, and just focusing on those issues that people care about. And that's what I really want to do. And I think I can do in this election. And I'm excited about it. I'm still very optimistic and hopeful, maybe too idealistic for my age, but, I do think, I'm seeing people step up. I'm seeing some momentum with recent elections. I'm seeing people, they're saying, okay, it's time to get involved, to get into the process. Hopefully we can bring in more young people. We can bring in more other people from different walks of life to say, all right, we just want to bring this back and start to rebuild our community. We want to, really make a difference. And I think we can. I think we will. I think we're ultimately, people believe in this democracy. They believe in, our country, and they're not going to take it. And, I think when come this time next year, we'll be sitting here, and I think we'll feel better. We'll feel more on the path to where we should be as a nation. And I'm looking forward to being a part of that. And, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I'm looking to really digging in and working hard to help not only the people in this district, but people in this country, because I think I still feel like we have a bright future, and that we can do great things.
Yeah, I agree. And I tell my class all the time, I say, you guys are by sheer number are a greater portion of the demographics than what's left. And if they showed up in mass to vote, they could change the world in a single election. And that's my goal, because there's too many people, I think, that feel like, oh, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter if I vote or not. I'm going to, that it doesn't affect the outcome. And, we saw from this most recent election how big that is such a mistake to make, to say that your vote doesn't matter or your vote doesn't count, because the 2025 election, the special elections, and these off calendar, I don't remember exactly how they say it, these off calendar elections that they have, we saw significant how much, it came down to simple votes that was just people came out, and it was amazing to watch, because, for the Democrats to take the amount of votes that they did was nothing short of a miracle. And if the midterms are anything like it, it won't just be a blue wave, it'll be a blue tsunami. And I think that even there's enough Republicans and non-MAGA people that are so tired of what's happening right now that they may have made a mistake and voted for Trump, thinking he would become more moderate or he would be a decent human being. And they found that he's the same person he was before, which hasn't, in fact, worse, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, really, he went from bad to worse. Not, I'm not sure if that's the dementia talking or the malignant narcissistic talking, but it's probably a little bit of everything. And I've told them, you guys show up and you can change elections. And I think that's so important, that we get out the vote. We get these people to understand how important their vote is. And that, while certainly I hope they vote for the right candidates and whatnot, I also recognize that I would rather you show up and vote, even if I disagree with your vote, simply to get you into the habit of making votes. I had a scholar on, her name's Lindsay Cormack, who talked about that principle, that a lot of people aren't in the habit of voting, and so they don't vote, right? And so it's something that parents need to do, is, when your child's 18, you need to take them to the voting place, or you need to get their ballot and help them vote so that they understand their role, rather than just hoping society teaches them, because unfortunately we found that they don't, right?
Yeah.
Because politicians are not the same thing as voters. And we
Mhm.
need to remember that when we're helping people vote, is that it's the goal is to be educated and informed voters so that they can make the right decisions and vote for the right people, whoever those
Yeah,
may be.
and yeah, and we've even stripped out civics and part of our curriculum for kids and whatnot, and, my daughter just and I'm, encouraging her to participate. She's certainly gonna vote, so I guess I got at least 1 vote next year, which is great, but, at the end of the day, there really is important for young people to get involved generally, and, for me and for my kids, again, why I'm doing this is for their future. And I want to be able to look at them at the end of the day, say, I did everything I could to fight for you and your future and all of our futures. And I think it's important for everyone to feel that way. This is important. This is part of democracy. It's part of the process. You have the right, and you should exercise it in as many ways as you can.
Yeah. And that's I think that's so valuable. Did you ever watch The West Wing?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite shows. It actually is one of the things that got me excited about politics again and kind of got me through Trump's first term was seeing that there was positive that even if it's a fictionalized account, right? That someone imagined a government that was magnanimous as the Bartlett White House, that someone had the imagination to come up with these beautiful things to say that could represent government. And I understand it's a fictionalized form of government. I'm not saying it's real, but at the same time, why can't we work towards that fictionalized version of government? Why can't we work towards a more perfect union or a perfect union that's pending, as the case may be? Because why not? Why can't government be a source for good? But a source to help others and to pretend. I would rather have my tax dollars go towards helping my fellow man than the billionaires that I will never, ever have anything in common with, no matter how much money I make, right? Like I will never have, because my moral code is very different than theirs when it comes to these types of things. And I would much rather my tax dollars help the people in need, the mother that's struggling. This idea of welfare queen is such a misnomer.
Oh,
It's such a travesty that
yeah.
we've uh, we pick on the most uh, you know uh, man, the word's escaping me.
I'm vulnerable. The most
Vulnerable. There we
vulnerable
go. Exactly. We're pick.
people. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
just is absurd.
it's not about handouts. It's about opportunity and
Yeah.
hope. And people want and people work hard. I mean, you look at people who are taking SNAP benefits. These are people who are working, who are trying many times working multiple jobs, trying to care for their family. They're not looking for handouts. They just want hope and opportunity. And so, but the other thing is for politicians is we just can't use those as platitudes. We got to walk the walk, and we got, like you said, prioritize the things that will make this happen. And those are the things that I've been talking about again and again. This is rebuilding our economy and talking about educational opportunities and providing access to healthcare and bringing down the cost of healthcare. And so, and having real ideas behind that, and then coming together and actually getting things done. And so, yeah, it's about having the will as well, right? For politicians to actually have the will. And so, again, it's okay to use these words and just and talking about high level, but we really need to it's time to walk.
Yeah, and I think that's so important is that, it becomes more about doing and less about talking.
Mhm.
Because I mean, no offense, politicians love to talk. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of it myself,
Mhm.
but at the same time, I like to think that I walk the walk too. That I don't just say things, and that I'm open to learning and growing, but also, putting my money and my actions where my mouth is. That's actually where Perfect Union Pending came from. Was I couldn't just sit back and while I don't have the resources to be the next Prof G or whatever. I do recognize the value of, speaking up and inviting people like yourself on here to help get out the word and help educate people about different people that can help our society, help it move forward. That, we shouldn't just sit back and relax and let others do what we can do for ourselves. Helping others comes in many different forms. And I think most importantly, and to kind of go back a little bit to your immigration discussion, helping them know that they're not alone, helping them know that there are, and for lack of a better way of saying it, I'm just going to say it, there are white people that are not bad, right? That there are white men that genuinely care for our Latino brothers and sisters, and our Black brothers and sisters, and our people that are different than us, that we can celebrate their differences and recognize the value that they bring to society, and that they're not scum to be gotten out of the country. The fact that President Trump treats that was discussing the other day about the Somali people breaks my heart. I mean, it makes me hurt to think that these beautiful people are being scapegoated and put in the limelight for no reason other than he doesn't like them, and the damage that he's doing and causing to these people is just beyond absurd, as though they've done anything to him that he could possibly complain about, that's had any type of negative effect. The boy with the golden spoon, and can't handle the people that have been given nothing. It's the epitome of hypocrisy to for someone who's been given literally everything in his life to say he wants to take away the good from the people that have had nothing given to them, right? They had to fight their way here to get it, and now he wants to take that away from them. It's just disgusting. Anyway, John, again, thank you. I know we were going to wrap up, but then I was like, oh, I wanted to talk about.
Oh no, it's all good. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. And I think that's the type of people we've been blessed and fortunate to have things you wouldn't expect us to say want to give back. But I think that's what we need to do. I think at the end of the day, it's important for politicians and folks to listen and not lecture, and to also be in part of the communities and understand what's going on. So, I really, thanks again for having me on and for being a voice and to having a program like this that's truly captures these issues and gets people, brings people to the forefront. I think they need more assessing, we need more discussions, more people involved. I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate you having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.